Oh man, muted. Good grief. Let's begin again. That's the kind of stream this is. Welcome to Comic Book Radio. This is episode 115. I'm your now audible host, Peter Cimetti. And the thing is that Adam was supposed to be here. Adam Lawson. Adam Lawson, I have not heard from him all day today. Anybody here? Hear Adam? See Adam? Know Adam? I hope he's okay. I hope he's okay. So, Adam Lawson and I were going to have a conversation about graphic design. Instead, I'm going to be having that conversation solo tonight. Unless he is around and ends up joining, which would be great. I'll field a bunch of your questions as well, and also hit up on several things that I would like to address in terms of graphic design mistakes that happen, stuff you want to avoid in comics, and stuff that I find is very basic, but a lot of people aren't aware of it. So I'll just address it again. And I've addressed a lot of these things before, but I'll say them again. But I'm glad to now be heard by you. Appreciate you guys giving me a heads up. Man, oh man. Actually, truth be told, this was on the entire time. I was muting, just miming the whole thing. Yeah, we'll go with that. So before we get started, I want to say hello to those of you in the chat. We got Real JBC here. What's up, Real JBC? Hope you're doing well. What Geeks Do Network is here as well. What's up, What Geeks Do Network? Bobo's in the house. How's it going, Bobo? Killer Kovacs is here. What's up, Killer Kovacs? John is in the house as well. John DeVoiced. What's up, John? Edwin is here too. Hey, Edwin, how's it going? Old Dirty Fatty is here. What's up, Old Dirty Fatty? Shane O'Sullivan. Good morning to you, Shane. Thank you for being here. We also have, let's see here. Gingered, what's up? Music only stream. We could do that. Just sit here and listen to that. We almost did. Almost. Rachel Brinkley, what's up, Rachel Brinkley? How's it going? Seer of All That Is Obvious is in the house as well. What's up? Hope you're doing well. Manny Cornejo is here too. What's up, Manny? Thank you for being here tonight. Rain 7 in the house as well. What's up, Rain 7? Hope you're doing good. HR is here. Ooh, watch out. HR. Don't want to mess with human resources. Some person, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Let's see. Sometimes sound is bugged. Refresh to see if it fixes. Nah, I was just being dumb. My mic was muted. See the little and you guys probably noticed it, but you'll see the little icon by the name. Yeah, that's what had happened. And it is what it is. Let's see. Real JBC says, I typed that 30 minutes ago. It loses a lot of context when the stream is live. Kind of makes me sound like a D-I-C-K. He did type that says 8:33. That's the timestamp. So, wasn't being rude. Nothing like that. It's okay if you are. I appreciate the enthusiasm and the excitement. The Beam Pad, what's up? Hope you're doing well. So, yeah, if Adam Lawson does pop in tonight, great. If not, it's okay too. We'll reschedule. Like I said, when people don't give me a heads up, and like I haven't heard from Kelsey Shannon in over 2 weeks. I know that's not that weird in regards to Kelsey, but still, you never know what happens, So I worry for people when they just disappear out of nowhere and you never hear from them. And then they pop up again and you're like, oh, yeah, whatever. I was just offline. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Wasn't worried about you at all. Nothing, didn't think that you died or something. You never know. Give people a heads up. So I haven't heard from Adam today, but again, if he does pop in, great. Either way. So, common graphic design mistakes in comics. Mostly going to be talking about layout, logos, and lettering. All right, first I'll start with layout. And layout is, and I'll use these as an example, right? We got the new Alterna Comics titles in. Layout is what it sounds like. It's just the layout of what the image is. Now, if it's in print, something I find that's very important, yet time and again, I deal with people who have no understanding of it, would be full bleed. Full bleed. What the page dimensions are. The image. Full bleed, trim size, safe space, etc., etc. And full bleed is when it goes to the edge. But in printing, you need to consult with your printer. Sometimes they want an 1/8 inch on each side. Sometimes they want a 1/4. And sometimes they might even want a 1/2, depending on what kind of printer you're using and how fast the speed of the printing is going through. Which means that when we send this to print, it does not look like this. We don't send a file that looks exactly like this to spec and then send it to them. If we did that, there's going to be moments where there's white space showing through. It's not advisable. It looks very amateur. So with our printer, we use a web press, and a web press goes very fast as opposed to offset, sheet fed, digital, that kind of a thing. So we give 1/4 inch on each side. So the measurements are technically a 1/2 inch bigger than the comic itself. And the image extends off the page on all sides. Sometimes that means you're going to have, like in this instance, on Wolf and Batsy here, or even this ad at Midnight Mausoleum, means you're going to actually have things that go, images that you've drawn or whatever it may be, that goes off and gets trimmed, never to be seen again. But it needs to be that way, because if it isn't that way, what happens is that as the printing is moving along and getting trimmed and pages are getting then compiled, there's always a little bit of a shift that can occur. Usually a 1/16 of an inch, an 1/8 of an inch. Sometimes it might even be dramatic though. It might be up to 1/4 of an inch. And if it does shift that way and you've got the image prepared, you'll be relatively fine. If you do the next stuff I'm going to talk about in a second. But you'd be relatively fine with full bleed, right? So you really want to make sure when you design full bleed files, consult with the printer and size your layout. Adjust the elements so that they're within the safe zone. The trim size, of course, is pretty self-explanatory. That's the size that it's going to be trimmed to. So it's going to be all around. Now, when you're designing and you have stuff in the safe zone, again, you want to make sure you're consulting with the printer. You can get really close sometime, right? like we do with some of the barcode, the things like that. Like on this, there's way more safe space on the side here. But still, things can shift. So as things shift, along with the printing, you want to make sure that you've designed everything within a safe area. Again, talk to the printer. Usually I would advise that what they tell you, important text and imagery. So if something were to get sort of cut, like if the very top of that little logo triangle were to get cut, that's a bummer, but it wouldn't be the end of the world, as opposed to, let's say, the name over here getting cut because you didn't give it enough room. So you usually want to give about a 1/2 inch from the edge for important elements, imagery and text. The other part too that a lot of people don't really take into consideration is there's a comfort when you're looking at something. It's strange. There's a science to it. I forget the exact science. But when something is like right to the edge, you see how that's right to the edge, right? When important imagery or stuff that you need to read, or, check out this ad here from Sigma Comics, right? Well designed. Look at that, right? Well designed. It's properly set up, so nothing is getting eliminated. Not even the little legalese at the side there. When it's right to the edge, some people might go, "Oh, put it right to the edge." First of all, you're risking it getting trimmed. Don't do that. So you can have full bleed, but if you're putting it right to the trim, you're risking it getting trimmed off. But when you're putting important imagery and you're spacing it out, you want to make sure you're giving enough room so that it's comfortable to read, so that the eye on certain elements, like the text here, things like that, are not right to the edge of the page. Now, some things will come off of the page. So you see how this image with this creature, it goes off the page and gets trimmed. You play up certain elements like that, but you wouldn't want to have like this guy's, let's say if there was a face here talking and you're cutting off the face. So you need to understand and utilize proper graphic design. It's about the composition, of course, but I find a lot of people have a difficult time understanding what full bleed, trim size, safe space, safe zone, safety area. There's all kinds of different words for it that different people, different printers use. They have a problem understanding what all of that means. Sometimes people think full bleed means the image goes to the edge, which it does. But they don't account for the fact that just because it goes to the edge on your file or on your image, that's still going to be trimmed. And the printer's going to do it automatically. They're going to take that and they're going to go, okay, well, we still got to trim. So they're going to do full bleed your file and they're going to trim. And if you didn't design that properly, you're going to get a lot of stuff cut off or come very, very close to the edge or even get like right to it and get trimmed. And that's not going to look good. You don't want that to happen, obviously. So it's that kind of thing where very basic, but I find a lot of people have a tough time with it. Another thing that's super basic as well, when you're printing anything, CMYK. When it's digital, RGB. High resolution is generally 300 dpi or higher for print. 72 works for the web. That kind of stuff. I can't tell you how many people I've seen send in files and they didn't save them properly. And it goes right to 72 dpi. They downsized it, didn't have a separate print ready file. And then they print it out and it's very pixelated. Another thing that you want to do as well, let me just pop that banner up right there. You don't want to save print ready files as JPEGs. The reason being that with each save on a JPEG, it compresses further. So it gets more and more pixelated. It's a lossy file. It loses data with each save. I can't explain how or why it does that. I just know it does. So you want to generally save it as a TIFF, or in some cases you could do it as a PDF, but make sure you're saving properly in terms of what the PDF is. Because if you save a layered PDF and it's basically something where you've now compressed those layers and you've made it a print ready PDF, if you need to access that again, you can't, because all the layers are compressed together. So it might look great and be ready for print, but if your publisher or your pre-press person or the printer or your graphic designer or whatever, your letterer, needs to get in there again and tweak something or change the color profile or whatever it may be for your files to print properly, they can't go in there and necessarily do that. It's going to become a difficult task. So it's always best to save things in layers. When you save things in layers too, don't just like save layers mumbo jumbo crazy all over the place. You want to make sure you're consolidating as much as you can. I've looked at files sometime where people have like over 100 layers. I'm like, what are you doing? And it'll be like for every single little thing is a layer. That's one thing when you have it, but then when you give it to the publisher, the pre-press, the printer, etc., you want to condense that down as much as you can so that it basically looks more or less like there's a layer of art, and then your layers for text, whatever it may be. Usually they're vector or active text files. I'll get into that in a second. And then, if you want to have a separation with the balloons and things like that, you could do that. But sometimes people will put the balloons as a part of the art. It's good and bad. Things can misregister if you're printing with certain kinds of printers. So there's all kinds of stuff like that. I see if you guys do have questions, put them in the chat. This is a very, I don't know, specific, technical episode. Now something else with text. When you're sending black text to print, you want to make sure it's 100% black. If you have it before color black, it's going to print a bit wonky. So that's something else that's important. You always want to talk to the printer as well. Another thing that's important when you're adjusting your files and putting everything through, you want to make sure that you're getting color profiles and understanding what kind of paper you're using with your printer and what kind of ink that can hold. Most paper can hold, it's a total ink coverage between CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, black. Most of that, I'd say roughly in the 250 to 270 range. You can go all the way up to 400% and have 100. But that creates a really deep, intense black color. Not usually needed, not usually really advised, because you can have smearing that occurs during the printing process depending on what you're using and what you're doing. So different paper stocks absorb the ink differently. So we have like a kind of a gloss cover, but then we've got newsprint interior. It absorbs the ink differently. So on the newsprint, we use a lot less on the total ink coverage, usually between 200 to 210. And then when it comes to black, because the paper absorbs so much ink, I really have a tendency to stay away from putting more than 10% black if it's a shade of a color, unless you want it very dark. Otherwise, it's going to really take over because it bleeds through the paper. It soaks it up. The dot gain is technically what it's referred to. So you got to kind of tweak the settings, but it's not too difficult once you understand it. Talk to the printer. They usually give you the deal of how you need to prep whatever it is you're doing. If you're prepping in InDesign, if you're prepping in Photoshop, if you're prepping on any other kind of software to send files to the printer, you can adjust your settings appropriately. It's not that difficult. It's just a little bit of a learning curve depending on what kind of paper stock you're using. The other thing that people don't really take into account is this, and it happens way more with graphic novels than with single issues. Okay, so here is a 2-page spread. All right, you have to make certain adjustments with the 2-page spread. This is in red koi number 7. This 2-page spread, because it's in a single issue, you can open it out, and it aligns perfectly. You have to make sure that you're consolidating and taking into account the margins and the gutter. There are various publishers that even on a single issue, professional publishers too, like Big Two, where the gutter loss on a 2-page spread is atrocious. And so you might have, like, depending on how it was laid out, you might have a face in the middle. And that face is just cut off because the gutter, which would be this, ate up the face. So it looks more like you would fold in on it. It would look more like that as opposed to being properly spaced like that. Now, where the gutter really counts is taking into account the gutter spacing on a graphic novel. So something like this, the more pages you have, the more you have to account for the gutter, which means that you also have to painstakingly, and I'd say it's a good rule of thumb, over roughly 200 pages, start moving about a 1/16 of an inch. A page that's on the right, move it a 1/16 of an inch to the right. Every 100 pages, another 1/16 of an inch to the right. Same thing for the page on the left. Excuse me with that. Page on the left, move the imagery to the left. Again, if it's a full bleed image, account for that too. When you're laying out the pages for that 2-page spread, also account for that. So there's a lot of things you have to take into account when you're prepping that book for print. But a lot of people with the gutter loss, what happens is that if they put things too close, let's say the whole graphic novel especially, perfect bound is when it's bound at the side and it's flat and square bound. It's not necessarily square, but it's bound together, usually glue, stitch sometimes, and they sew it through. Depending on the level of quality you're looking for, sewing it adds more durability to it, but it also adds more cost as well. Sometimes glue is enough, sometimes it isn't. Depends on how thick the book is, depends on the paper stock involved. Go by your printer's recommendation. It's very important to talk to the printer. A lot of people I find don't talk to the printer. They just send them the stuff and then that's it. The printer is going to assume you know what you're doing. So ask questions and make sure you're talking to the pre-press person, not just the person who handles something. So when you're putting a full bleed graphic novel together and you've got and this is where layout really factors. We talked about it before with layout, right? Now, if you're putting that together with layout on a full bleed, every single page on the inside is a full bleed. Let me find another full bleed page here. If I can, I'll show. Okay, yeah. Okay, this one. So here's a full bleed page. If you're putting that together and you've got word balloons and captions and all that stuff, if you're putting a graphic novel together in particular and it's thick and you've got your lettering too close to the gutter, it's going to be difficult to open and bend the book properly. That's the one advantage when it's sewn. You can really lay the book flat. Some printers even have like a lay flat technology where you can actually open it. It doesn't destroy the book, doesn't destroy the spine. Most people don't use that though. It adds cost. But if you're doing it with a single issue, it's not as bad. You got the staples there. So a page like this and a page like this, depending on how thick that book is, you might end up losing certain elements to the gutter. And it's going to be difficult. You're going to constantly battle with the book to put it down, and you're trying to read what's there. So you want to make sure that when you're doing that, when you're lettering, this is the letterer's task. You want to make sure that you're laying it out properly, and that you're actually putting it so that you've got enough room to not just account for within the art, but you've got enough room to account for the gutter loss that's going to occur. Now, if it's like a 50 to 60 page book, that's not going to be too bad. You still want to have a good rule of thumb. When it comes to lettering, I'd go at least a ½ inch from the edge of the page. Sometimes I'll go an inch. It really depends how thick it is, what the layout is on the page, and how it kind of lines up with everything. But those elements will make it so that you can actually have people who read the book and enjoy the book and aren't frustrated by that experience. Nothing's worse also than having a gorgeous 2-page spread and it gets eaten up in the middle. So learning how to lay that out makes it a lot easier. Philip says, how to save double-page spread before sending to the editor as one file or two. It depends. I prefer getting it as one file. Getting it as one horizontal landscape oriented image, and then I can size it properly as how it needs to be. Some people prefer to get it as two separate, but if you get it as two separate, you have to really know what you're doing, because it's far easier to get it as one file and then divvy it up the way it needs to be so that it prints perfectly. That's just in my experience. What's up, Ronan's Review? Hope you're doing well. Thank you for being here tonight. Rachel says, say Pete, do you get a trial print made to see how it will look before the main print run goes through? Yeah, but I don't really need it. The printer's kind enough to send it. What I do instead, if I'm ever unsure of anything, which is this one thing in particular, is I recommend doing it, especially when you print this way for the first time. Let's say it's this page. You're going to print for the first time, right? This is Blood Realm number 13, page 1. Print this at home to size. And the reason I say that, before you even do anything else, letter it, everything else, and then print it. See how it looks. See if the lettering looks fine. Compare your lettering to books where you enjoy the lettering, where you've read them and you find that, yeah, that's a good size. Comparing them to even something from, I don't know, the mid-'80s, let's say. And you can adjust your lettering either the same size or a little bigger. Some people go a lot bigger. I find there's a tendency in the digital age, the lettering can get to be really small, uncomfortably small. Like you have to break out a printer's loop to check out all of the lettering. And I think it's because a lot of the letterers are working on a computer and they zoom in and then they can adjust everything as they need to. But what happens is that they don't zoom out and realize, holy smokes, that is very small. They don't do a test print. They don't compare the lettering size. Even take a digital sample. Scan something in and then take a digital sample of it and then just compare the size. And you just got to do that like really once, because then you just have that sample the whole time. But that's so important. A lot of the lettering on modern books is so small, and the worst thing you can do in that level, in that respect for your lettering, other than make it just it looks bad, is make it unreadable. So yeah, I don't necessarily need a printed book to know how it's going to be. I've been doing this long enough at this point, but it's always nice when the printer does send that. It's not often in terms of how printers do that. Sometimes they'll charge you. Sometimes, depending on the scenario, A digital printer, pretty affordable. They could just send you a copy. Like our printer sends digital printed proofs. If they did like an exact one to print it off, wouldn't even be worth it. It wouldn't be worth it at all. It would cost easily like $500 for that one proof, because they'd have to set up the whole system, the whole plating, everything, just to print a proof on the newsprint the way it would be done when we get it back. It just wouldn't make any sense. So offset printers, web press printers, usually they'll send like a digital proof. If you want an exact proof based on what you're doing, like it's going to be a proof that every single paper spec is there. It's going to be printed the exact same way. That's going to cost you a little more depending on what it's going to be. Maybe you do want that. So it's more like a prototype as opposed to like a proof. But most printers will just also send along a digital proof, just so you can see the registration marks, how it's going to print, how it's going to trim, that sort of thing. So I can't stress enough, talk to the printer. Talk to the printer. Get paper samples. I got a bunch of paper samples. I mean, they're all over the place. I've got at least 100 paper samples of different interior, cover stock, card stock, coated stock, uncoated stock, various foil, inline foil, outer foil, embossed, etc., etc. Get as many paper samples as they'll be willing to send you. And if you can even get stuff done from them that's a sample based on something completed. So let's say if they printed a bunch of Alterna books, because every printer always has a ton more completed materials than they would want to let on. There's tremendous amount of waste in the paper industry. So they generally keep stuff that they think looks good or is a good representation of what they could do. They'll keep that on hand to send out as a sample when someone requests it. Ask for samples. Let them know what kind of thing you're looking for. Let them know, describe the paper as best as you can. If you don't know, if you have a technical background, you can't say like, I want a 30-pound paper stock. I want an 80-pound cover. I want gloss. I want uncoated. If you don't have any of that technical background, let them know. Be as descriptive as you can. And then they'll send you the paper stock. Any printer worth their salt is going to then put a post-it on it and just let you know what paper stock that is. They want to work with you. Hopefully. That's also a really good way to see, do they want to work with you? Because I've also met with printers who it's very difficult to communicate with them. They were very, not unpleasant, but somewhat unprofessional in the way of understanding. I have to know what we're going to be printing and how that's going to come out and get an idea of the best paper to use for this project. So what do you mean you can't send any paper samples? That's a printer you go, okay, thank you for your time, and you move on. But again, I can't stress enough. Talk to the printer. Michael Dice, thank you so much. Says, I feel like I should kick in some coffee and donut money for this seminar. I appreciate that. Thank you, Michael, for the $5 super chat. Splintering, what's up, Splintering? Hope you're doing well. Thank you for being here. What Geeks Do Network, thank you for the $1.99. Says, learn a lot here, Pete. Thanks. No problem at all. And, yes, Blast Pete. Yeah, it's hard to talk when they never answer the phone. Again, you'll find out a lot just trying to send them an email. You'll see even response time. If you do need to talk to them on the phone at all and they don't want to talk to you on the phone at all, all these little things don't just tell you how to print your book properly, because it's a lot of time and money. And this is something that you obviously care about, and people are going to get it, and you want them to cherish it. It'll at least, you won't just learn also about what you need to do to make it right, but you'll learn about, when I work with these people, is that going to be a pleasant experience? Because also, There's problems that happen when you go to print. I've had, I don't even know, 20 printers I've worked with in almost as many years. And some of them don't handle problems well at all. I'm blessed and fortunate enough to say that the printer we're currently working with has been great. Whenever we've had problems, I let them know, and they don't repeat the problem as best as they can. Sometimes it is what it is. The machinery does what it wants to do, and then it might have the same error happen again, and we let people know, and then they take care of it. They'll give a refund or a credit. But there's been other printers where, man, they'll screw up a whole entire run, and they don't want to take ownership for that. Or the way that they'll pack it will be horrible. Horrible. So it gets destroyed during transit. And again, they don't want to take ownership for that. So you really have to be mindful of who you're dealing with. And I say that too because of the fact that when I had started for the first, easily for the first 5 or 6 years, because we mostly just worked with digital print on demand for the first 2. And then we went to offset and sheet fed. And we mostly just printed graphic novels. So I didn't do a whole lot of communicating with the printer because it would just be like, okay, give me some paper samples, cover stock samples, and then that would be about it. And we did a lot of black and white at the time. So with the graphic novels, we didn't really do a lot of full color. So it was a pretty easy process. But going into single issue printing is a whole different mess. And I still encourage talking to the graphic novel printer anyway, too, when you go and do that. But, full disclosure, I come from a graphic design background. That's what I went to school for. Major in graphic design, minor in business. So it's one of those things where I was way more familiar with the technicality of all these different terms and whatnot. So I knew what to ask. I knew what to go in there for. There's people that are getting into comics that have no idea, that don't know what to ask, don't know what to say. I could tell them what's the difference between a 60-pound text stock and a 60-pound cover stock. And they're going to go, one's the cover? I'll be like, yeah, but what's the difference? They're both 60-pound. What's the difference? So it's all these different things where you go into it, and it's a lot to take in. And I get it. You're kind of getting a whole education as you're going through and doing all this stuff. But that's why it's so important to ask the questions to the people who you're working with. Ask the questions to the people that you're going to have print your book. Familiarize yourself and learn as much as you can. There's so many different things out there that can just tell you how various printing systems even work. There's a lot of different, not just tutorials on certain things, but there's a lot of different ways where you could just look up terminology and just get to be more familiar with it, so you're not as green behind the ears, as they would say. But it's all those things. Talking to the printer. But that's number one. I can't stress that enough. Too many people not doing that. Kelraiser, thank you for the $4.99. Says, as someone that is working on their own indie comic, this is some invaluable information. Thanks, Pete. There you go. You got it. And again, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat. If you guys have specific questions, I'll get to them as much as I possibly can. I'm taking a look back here in case I missed anything. Ginger says 2-page spreads work best in the center of the book where the staple is, because they are on the same sheet and you don't have to account for gutter loss or printer drift. They do, but at the same time, you can't always put them there. So you want to really make sure that you're laying them out properly and accounting for the trim, the gutter loss, all of that. Get as close as you possibly can. We kind of have it down to a science as much as possible, but there's still occasions where it'll be like, a 16th or an eighth of an inch off or something like that, but nothing tremendous. But I've seen 2-page spreads where it looks like there was a half an inch eaten up. And depending on how that image is laid out, and if the artist put it so that there's a face, especially when they put a face in the middle, when they put a face in the middle and then everything else is like around, It looks real cool as like a poster or something, you know? But once it gets to be printed, that face in the middle, dead center, right on the line. You're asking for it. You're asking for it. Once it starts getting wonky, you get people that it looks like a funhouse mirror, you know, where people just kind of look. The eyes are practically together. There's no nose, you know, that kind of a thing. Gerald says, when picking a printer, ask for a sample of packet of papers and print samples, which most will do. Yes, 100%. Coding samples too, absolutely, 100%. Let's see here. I'm looking up, seeing if there's any questions. If not, I'll move on to the next thing. Seer says, enjoyed that issue of Blood Realm. There you go. I'm glad to hear that. All right, let's see. Okay, that looks like about it. All right, next thing. That's largely layout, covering layout. Logos. Logos. Oh, logos. Now, logos are... It's a subjective thing like all art. But there are still elements where you can look at a certain logo and go, that just doesn't look right. And I don't mean it's not the tone. It's not matching the tone of the book or the character or whatever it may be. But you'll see certain things, and these usually are dead giveaways. The logo has a combination of all of these elements. Outline, drop shadow, emboss, and gradient. All of them in one logo. There's not a logo on earth that could stand up to that. That's a bad logo. People that are putting a lot of effects, and the same thing goes even with comic coloring. You'll notice that it's almost like an airbrushiness to it. You know, when it's getting a little too crazy with the digital effects. Looks way better when you can just get back to basics. With logos, goodness. Be bold with it. Be bold because they have to be readable, right? They have to be seen. Especially if you're putting them on in retail as well. They have to be seen, which is why I can't stand a lot of the time with modern comics where you'll see they move the logo, it's really tiny, or there is no logo because it's the Virgin variant, you know, and they're embarrassed that they're a comic. All these kinds of different things. Comics has a really weird tendency in general as an industry to be... To wish to trick the customer into thinking that it is anything but a comic. Instead of leaning into our strengths in the comic industry, we tend to cringe at them and be ashamed. And what I mean by that too is like, okay, so here we have Red Koi number 7. You know, you can see the logo, Red Koi. And then, oh, look at that. Oh, no, there's text on the cover. Oh, yes, there's text on the cover because there's also text inside the book. Does it mean that it's laid out the same way that an interior page is laid out? No. But the comic industry and a lot of people in comics in general have a tendency to not want to have this, like the text on there, anything like that. You know, just here, wouldn't it just look so much better if it was just this? Yeah, but that's not a comic. That's a poster then. That's a poster. That's a piece of, you know, if it's just that's all you see. Yeah, that's nice. But what is that? So when it comes to the logo, you really want to make sure bold, stick to 1 or 2 color. And then if you're going to have a drop shadow, make sure that drop shadow is not combating or competing. Like let's say here. All right, so we got Unit 44. It's got a drop shadow. And it's got a stroke around the letters. All right. You want to make sure that the drop shadow isn't competing with something else that's also in the background. You also want to make sure that the drop shadow is not something that is being used instead of having an outline. Like if Unit 44 was drop shadowed instead of having a stroke as well, that would look strange. That would look a bit strange. It would just be white You'd have to change the whole logo color completely. Blood Realm is a really great example of it's got a good feeling. It feels like that kind of archaic fantasy, that kind of a thing. Wolf and Batsy, it's a clever logo. I don't know how many of you have noticed, but the F is like a werewolf profile, and then you get the Y, it's like a bat. Right, so Brian did a good job with that. You know, something when it comes to logo outside of designing them. And every single logo is going to look different, obviously, depending on what you're doing. Some are going to have more design than others. Some are going to be more simple. But whatever you do when you're laying out that logo, when you're laying out the logo, if you start stretching it, if you start taking it somewhere else and or even from issue to issue, and you're stretching it, you're putting it out of proportion, you're distorting your own logo, don't do that. That never looks good. That never looks good. I've seen examples of that happen sometime within some of the bigger publishers. It still doesn't look good. You know, if you take an iconic logo, which is, let's face it, like the whole point of the logo is to be iconic. That's your brand in text. That's the book in text. And then you just distort it, stretch it, you know, enlarge it, whatever, all over the place, out of whack. It's not in proportion. That logo is going to look bad. You're going to lose consistency across the board with that. You should have consistency of design and consistency of placement when it comes to logo. And even color scheme. If your color scheme is not working. So in here, the olive, the green color here, green and yellow, was taken from in here. Taking the color of the logo from some color that's also on the cover is important. White logo, there's white on the cover. Red logo, there's also red on the cover. So on and so forth. If you're going to put a color in the logo that can't be found on the cover, then make sure that you understand your color theory and you're using a color that works. That either is making that logo pop, which is usually what you want, or is making it fade, which is sometimes what you want depending on how you want to play that up. Maybe at that point you use not a drop shadow, but you use a logo that's... Do I have one of these that I could... No, none of the new ones. But you would then layer underneath with kind of like an accent, a background accent color that would make that logo not completely fade into the background. But there's some logos out there, they're very busy and they're fighting against the art. They're tough to read because they're so busy. They're over-designed. You got to simplify the logo while also distilling it down to the feel of the book. Again, there's an artistry behind this that isn't just as easy as just type it, make it big, make it bold, and there's your logo. It's tougher than it looks. It's not too tough, though. It's just tougher than it looks. Lion Mill, thank you so much for the 5. Says, would you give me a logo critique? I'd like to hear what you say, and I can take a serious critique. I went to art school when that meant something. Yeah, I can give you a logo critique if you want. Send me on Twitter. Send me a DM. Exactly, real JBC. Comic Sans, probably the best font for logos. A background accent. Yeah, a baccent. You guys are great. So, yeah. So, yes, your eyes would hurt just thinking of that logo. Yeah, you really want to avoid putting, I would say 2 max. You know, and like I said before, you get an outline, you get a drop shadow, emboss, which I really don't suggest using. Most people don't know how to use that effectively. It really shouldn't be done for logos. Sometimes it's done. Yeah. And then gradient. 2 at the most. Emboss could look cool if you know what you're doing, but if it's in combination with the others, it might not work well. One usually is the rule of thumb if you're going to use one. You could do that. Sometimes you don't need to use any of those. Sometimes it could just be simple. The logo, no anything else. No outline, no drop shadow, no gradient, no embossing, none of the bells and whistles. It's a strong logo. And then you can just kind of have that background accent color, and that makes it pop. But most people usually put like maybe an outline, a stroke around the logo. Sometimes it's not needed, sometimes it is. It's all about incorporating what makes it pop against the art, or makes it take a back seat or work with the art. It depends on the composition, it depends on the book, it depends on the tone. So there's all kinds of different things to take in mind there. That's where usually either the letterer, or you might just have a graphic designer on your book. Sometimes people just have a graphic designer on the book that does all kinds of different layout elements and whatnot. I take care of all that stuff at Alterna. I think about half of the logos at Alterna I did. And then, the other layout elements as well of barcode, corner box if you've got that, cover blurb with the balloon, or maybe you've got something that maximizes what's occurring in the issue, depending on if the person wants it there or not. Some creators really don't want anything else on the cover. Depending on the situation you're in, that's how it goes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But there's a lot of time where logos can absolutely, for me personally anyway, turn me off from a book. The art can look great, and then that logo, I'm like, man, yikes. So logos are important, but whatever you do with your logo, no matter what, even if it's poorly designed, you absolutely positively have to, when you enlarge or shrink the logo, keep it proportioned. Keep it proportioned. Don't be stretching it everywhere, all over the place. That's practically like rule number one. You'll even see that too with a lot of corporate brands. When they say, if you're to use this logo, do not do anything to it. Leave it as is. Don't change the color. Don't change any of that. Don't change the sizing and stretch it out. Nothing. All right. So the final thing, lettering. Boy, oh boy. Lettering's a whole episode unto itself. I talked with Adam last time, Adam Lawson, who was supposed to be on the show tonight. And again, I hope he's okay. I haven't heard from him at all. And obviously he hasn't stopped by. And then I also talked to Rick Joseph, who is a great letterer as well. If you're looking for a really solid letterer, get in touch with Rick Joseph. He'll help you out. But I'll touch upon a couple of different things with lettering. And if you guys have questions too with that, any questions, let me know. And I'll do my best to try to answer them. Let me see here. Before I start into that, let me make sure. All right. I'm not seeing anything else here. Okay. Charlie says, do you think you could see if Scott McCloud might want to come on? You and his books have been a godsend in learning the tricks of the trade. Also, sorry for the question bombardment. Oh, did you have a lot of other questions? I'll have to go through and see. Unless this is what you're referring to. I'm not really going to see if he would want to come on. I have a few reasons for that. I'll leave it at that. But that's great that you could that you've taken a lot from learning from his books. That's fantastic. Anything you can learn from is great. Sometimes I find that not necessarily his books, to some degree maybe his books, but every kind of how-to book I find, especially in writing. Writing's the worst. Writing's the worst when it comes to the how-tos. It becomes so formulaic that everything ends up looking the same when people follow it. So what I mean by that is that people a lot of the time ask for, writing advice or what's the best writing book or whatever it is. You can honestly probably pick whatever has the best reviews on Amazon. Just get that, the one, and then that's it. Because they're all going to say the same stuff. They're all going to talk about the same 3-act structure and, how to develop characters and all this other stuff. And everything just becomes the same sort of thing. So if you want to actually get your writing to be better, I recommend not just reading within the medium you want to work in. If it's more prosaic, if it's more poetic, if it's comic, if it's just, screenwriting. But I also recommend reading books about, or from at least familiarizing yourself with philosophy, psychology, history, biographies, that kind of a thing. That'll go a long way into helping you to actually not just learn how to put something together, but what makes it good and how to play upon those things, those elements within your writing. Because you can learn about what makes a good story a good story. Break it down, be very objective with it. But why? Why did that person do that? Why is it a good story? Why is it compelling? That's a whole different thing. Like you can break down a recipe for food and you look at it and go, okay, I put that together, I do that and this and that. But if you don't know why those flavors work together, if you don't know why you'd put a little more salt, a little less sugar, whatever that may be, then you're not really necessarily a chef. You're following instructions, sure. So it's the same thing. If you're following instructions, you can piece together a story, but you're not really a writer yet. And I know a lot of people get very offended by that. It's the same thing with being an artist with stuff. It's like, yeah, you can reference something. It's like if every single thing you do when you're an artist is you're always referencing. You never actually draw from imagination whatsoever at all. Yeah, you can draw well. That's good. You can reference the thing. But then if you take away a reference and you say, okay, draw what you just drew. And a lot of the time, those people can't, for the life of them, do that. Then it's like, well, are you really an artist then? So it starts to become kind of like you're splitting hairs, but at the same time, it's such an important distinction. And when you want to start pursuing it professionally, that's when it becomes that level that a lot of people don't want to have that conversation. A lot of people, it turns into like, oh, that's really mean. It's going to get worse. So if anything, that's actually very helpful because it's a point where you can actually do it. You can do it. You can do that thing. Now, if the person, obviously, if you're an artist and you could be a very talented artist, but a person wants you to work referentially, portrait work, landscape work, a tattoo artist, that kind of a thing, or whatever. Yeah, of course, then you're an artist. Yeah. I'm talking about if you can't whatsoever, for the life of you, work non-referentially. So the same thing turns with when you're a writer, too. If you can't, every single thing you're working from is you're following that formula, you can't ever get creative. I guess that's the big component, the creative aspect. So if you can get creative with it. But yeah. Yes and no. Yes and no. Because there's a tremendous amount of tattoo artists that don't work referentially. So some are. And some, have their whole portfolio out so you can get an idea of what to see. But it's not necessarily referential on certain things. But then others are, of course, they would be that way because someone comes in and they want it to be this exact thing. And then so you need to work referentially. It doesn't mean you're not talented. It doesn't mean that you're not good. Nothing like that. But it's different in terms of, and I'm talking specifically like comic art and things like that at this point. And I'm sticking mostly to comics with this. It's how can you referentially create your comic? 100%. Not that you're referencing still to get an idea of composition or the thing you're trying to draw or the building or the landscape or whatever it is, but there's so many things in comics you're going to have to work from your imagination. You're going to have to work from your own inner database. And the same thing with when you're writing, you're going to have to learn a tremendous amount of things and then bring that into the characters you're coming up with, the scenario, the setting, the environment. Exactly. Yeah. So it can't all be referential, because as soon as you start working with someone and they're like, okay, draw this thing, and you're like, I don't know what the hell that is. There's no reference for that. That sounds like imagination's involved. Then it becomes a very arduous task. So a lot of people get involved with doing that because they're like, oh, I could draw that. And the same thing happens too with people who are looking for interior art positions for comics. And then all they show is like pinups and covers, and it's not the same thing. It's not at all. And you can be very, very good at it, but it's not the same. And if you don't think it's not the same, I suggest for people to try it. Draw a cover as best you can, and then come up with like a 3-page story and lay that out and draw that. Man, it is not the same. Ben says there are so many types of writing structures. I would say study them all and use the one that clicks for you. And the thing is, when you study a bunch of them, you're able to then go into it and use certain ones at certain points in time to construct your stories. So there you go. All right, so lettering. As far as lettering goes, there's something really important that you have to consider when you're lettering. So I would say this is the biggest one. Consistency across the board. Consistency of style, consistency of font. And I don't necessarily mean that you can't switch up your font or you can't switch up a style of a balloon, but there has to be a reason for it. So if all of a sudden you've got your styles going all over the place, if you've got different balloon tail styles going all over the place, every balloon's a different font because you think every single character should have their own specific individual font voice. It sounds good at first. I think we've all been there when we've made our comics. And eventually you start understanding, you know what, that's kind of crazy. I could see maybe 1 or 2 characters having a separate voice. If every single character has their own unique voice and style of balloon, combined with the art, it becomes a total mess, a total visual mess. That's important. That to me that's what I look for, number 1 with lettering. The second thing, obviously, font choice is very important. You want to make sure you're getting a font that is very easily understood. Sometimes there's fonts that are too compressed. Sometimes there are fonts that are too wide. Fonts that are too short and kind of stout. So you want to really make sure that the font that you're using is appropriate for someone reading the whole entire time. Again, there's a taste level to that. There's certain acceptable norms in fonts and comics. You might have seen certain styles or certain fonts. There's so many fonts to look at. It takes time to learn what works, what doesn't work, what people prefer, what they don't prefer, and then your own taste level too. Like anything, though, there's no accounting for taste. So someone could go in there, and if they don't have anyone to help them or edit them or suggest something to them, they might go in for their first 1, 2, or 3 projects. Really, like, everything's a learning phase. And we've been there. I mean, my first couple of projects were awful. But you learn. You learn over time. You learn faster when someone can help you out. But you will learn over time. But you want to obviously not try to repeat the same sort of mistakes. The next thing I would say, and these are common quantifiable lettering mistakes now. There's leading and kerning. The leading is the space between lines, letters, the text, and the kerning is the space between them. Leading is the horizontal. The other one's the vertical between the letters themselves. So sometimes you could still adjust leading, and then it's a letter that's up above others or lower than others. It depends. So here we have lettering by Wes Loker. So to show you guys more of an so leading would be the space between the lines there, lines, leading, and then kerning, the space between the letters. So if you've got lettering that's too tight and it's compacted, needs more room between the lines. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to read. Same thing with if the letters are too close or if they're too far apart. What looks comfortable, generally what looks comfortable is when the letters just barely touch. So the kerning's adjusted, the letters just barely touch. For the leading and the lines, generally what's comfortable is, I would say that, and nowadays it makes it so easy for you because a lot of these things automatically occur, but then I would still adjust them to be a bit tighter. You'd see a space of about maybe 3-4 millimeters. If I had to quantify that easier, I would say that you look at it and, okay, let's go back to the lettering here. Okay. So when you're typing everything out, and you can see it even right there in the chat, there's all of that playing out right in front of you. All of these things, they're everywhere, and we barely notice them, and they're all quantified so that they're comfortable, so that you get these lines in between. And the space, I'd say, is roughly a quarter of the font size. And of course, you can probably estimate that when you look at it. But it's almost the same thing. Now, if it's on a screen, you'll find that the space between the lines and the letters is usually a little bit larger than what you would normally find in print. And that's because of the screen resolution being so much different than the print resolution. So you need more spacing on the digital because there's just a tiny bit of blur. If you really, look up, you can see the pixels. Whereas on the lettering, you really shouldn't see pixels. Sometimes you might see, if it's rasterized, you might see a bit of a jaggedness to it. And that leads me to something else that's important. When you are utilizing your letters and you're going to send them to print, you want to make sure you're converting to shape, or in some cases, you're going to send active text files and then send the printer the font. Usually the easiest thing to do, though, is to just convert it all to shape, keep it vector. Rasterize is basically flattening them down, and it's going to be kind of ever so slightly pixelated. Most people will not notice it. But depending on the scenario and the resolution, they might. The vector will never, ever look pixelated, jagged, anything like that. It keeps the information. It doesn't lose any of it. So it's sharp. You can enlarge it, you can shrink it down, you can do whatever you got to do to it. It's going to still maintain a high resolution, very clean reproduction. So when you convert to shape, it keeps the vector information. If you keep the active text files and send the printer the font, keeps that vector information. But there is human error that can occur, because I used to do that, and then we had an issue where the printer forgot to put the files into their system, and then the system populated a font that was closest to, and of course looked nothing like it. So I stopped doing that. I said, we're going to just convert it all to shape. Can't edit though afterwards. You can, but it's a little trickier. It's not as easy as going in there when it's an active text file. And then if you convert to shape, send it to the printer, you have the fonts embedded in a print-ready PDF file, and then it'll print properly. It should anyway. Either way, you'll get back a proof, whether physical or digital, from the printer, and you can just line it up and see that everything was fine. But that's technical stuff once the lettering's all said and done, but it's so important. It'll help make your stuff look great, and that goes for anything that you have typesetting. That could be whatever you've got, merchandise, poster, whatever. That's kind of how you would do it. Even there's a lot of clothing printers that recommend it because you want to make sure you're getting as crisp of a font as possible. Spicer McLeroy, thank you so much for gifting 10 memberships to those in the chat. Really appreciate that. Thank you, man. Everybody that's now a member, enjoy your stay. And yeah, no problem. I hope this helps people. I want this episode to sort of, kind of be a one-stop reference for graphic design, if possible. You can always reference it, come back, and if you need some tips or some guidance on it or whatever, leave a question in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them after the show. So with the lettering, the other thing that I want to mention in terms of just getting it right, and this is as basic as it could get. It's all over the place. It's everywhere. Let me just show. I'll show King Cryptid so I can show my lettering. Having the lettering work within the environment, making sure that it works with the art, is a really important thing. Sometimes it'll break a box. Sometimes it's purposeful like that. A lot of the time when it's a third-party narration, I'll have it break the box. When it's narration then within the story, it'll go inside a box. So here we have the dialogue of King Cryptid. We have a thought balloon, and then we have he's speaking telepathically to the behemoth. You kind of have those lines there to be representative when you're designing a thought balloon. The lines that come out to make it more look like it's a psychic communication. Lettering is like the language of comics, so it's really important to be able to understand what you're doing so that you can speak that language to the reader. And they'll get accustomed to it, even if they're not accustomed to it over time. They'll get accustomed to it over the course of the comic. Something that's important with the lettering as well is to basically, and the next page is kind of a spoiler, so I don't want to do that. This is issue 1. With the lettering, having the connection of balloons and various other things, having things come from utilizing the tails so that they frame the art. The lettering should always frame the art. If it starts becoming on top of the art, especially if it starts coming to the point where it's actually directly on top of the characters, covering up something that's important. If you've got sound effects so much to the point that it's detrimental to the art, again, you need an editing eye. It takes time to get to that point. If you're starting out especially, I recommend getting an editor who is familiar and able to quantify, familiar with comics and able to quantify what makes the comic good or bad. If you work with an editor that is basically telling you that's good, that's bad, and they can't quantify what you need to do when it's bad, and they can't let you know why something is good, that's going to be a really difficult editor to work with, especially when it's something that needs to be corrected. So if someone presents something to me and I say, okay, that's bad, like Lion Mill wanted a critique on a logo, and if I just go, that doesn't look good. Okay, well, what do I need to do to fix it? I don't know. It just doesn't look good. Now, that's most people. Most people will do that, and that's fine. But that's not an editor. An editor should be able to then tell you it doesn't look good because of this, that, and the other thing. And so if you do this, that, and this, it'll look better. Give that a shot. That's an editor. There's a lot of people that maybe know why something looks good or why it looks bad in terms of they can see something and say, yes, that's bad. Yes, that's good. But they can't quantify it. They can't explain it. They can't describe it. That person should not be an editor. That person can absolutely have a right to their opinion and doesn't even need to explain it. So if someone's a reader of a book and is like, I don't know what it is about this book, I just don't like it. I don't know what it is about this art style, I just don't like it. Or conversely, they don't know what it is, but they love it. That's fine. You're not an editor. You don't need to explain that away. You don't need to describe that away. But if you're an editor, you have to be able to do that. Otherwise, it's going to be next to impossible to work with you as an editor. How can you work with someone who's editing your work if they can't actually describe to you and explain why it's wrong? And then you can't fix it if they can't explain it. But also there's times too where an editor can come in and tell you, okay, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. And someone will go, well, I don't think it needs to happen. I think it looks fine. There's something to be said for when a point is made from someone who's in a position that's trying to help you out to make it look the best it could be or have it be the best it could be. And an outright refusal to do that, as opposed to understanding there's a give and take, and there's also a certain time where, look, that just objectively looks bad, and you have to trust that I'm looking out for you here. You know, the editor would be looking out for that individual. And obviously, depending on the advice, depending on what it is, all that kind of stuff. Is this element, is the editor trying to go in there and are they changing the core elements of the story? Or are they revising? Are they editing? And making sure that the core elements are kept intact and that there's consistency involved and that they have obviously the best interests of you and the story and the characters at heart. It's very easy to know the difference between when someone's doing that and when someone's coming in and taking over your project. When they're taking over your project, it'll be things like they're changing character voice, they're changing characters, they're changing plots, they're changing story beats. Heck, sometimes they're changing outright character names, and even the title is no longer representative of the story that's being told. There's some editors that get really ego trippy with it too. So you'll know when you're working who's got the best interest of all of that. At this point, I'm not. But see, this is something that when I got into comics as a publisher was to try to help people as much as I could. But I'm finding that my position, and maybe it was always this way, because I've been ghost editor on a lot of Alterna books over the years. And I mean like uncredited in that position. I'm finding that publisher isn't really something that's needed as much as it was before, because there's so many ways now to publish and get stuff out there. There's so many avenues that are accessible to people. So publisher in a traditional sense really isn't something that's needed, and I didn't necessarily need one. So I'm not someone who's going to convince someone that they need a publisher, but I will absolutely convince people that they need someone who has experience and knowledge and can describe, explain, quantify, etc., how to improve their work, what needs to be worked on, what's right, what's wrong, etc., to make the best thing hopefully possible. I think everybody needs that. So that's something that I think one day maybe my position will completely evolve into that. But for right now, I'm not taking on any editing or anything like that. But again, maybe one day, most likely one day, to be perfectly honest. I just see it evolving to that. Ben Soto says, did you see Eric Kennedy tweet about the word balloons covering up a bomb/device on a panel? Good example of balloons intruding. Yes. If I really wanted to take a lot of time, I could point out a lot of different, like I could do a whole editing show and just like circle a bunch of different things of like where, because there's a lot of stuff too in mainstream comics, sometimes because of the fact that they're up against deadlines and things. I get it, but there's certain things that it should be second nature. You don't do that. I remember Andy Smith showing something on Twitter about the letterer not framing. It was a Green Lantern panel. He worked on a book, and it was the most awkward placement of the lettering that was like over important story elements, as opposed to putting that lettering in the negative space of the art, where obviously could have been, and it would have framed it so much better. And instead, the letterer didn't do that. So there's all kinds of things you could circle and point out and put the placement here, put the placement there. Same thing would happen with that if I was, or actually it has happened when I've worked with a lot of creators at Alterna, where I'm like, that lettering has to be there, move there, put there, and frame the art as opposed to being on top of it. That's kind of a tendency, or sometimes you'll see it a lot in amateur books and people that are just learning, and obviously you will because they're not experienced yet, but they'll have the balloons and things like that with the tails, and the balloons are like big, I call them like footballs, and you'll see a lot of text in the football, and then the tail is pointing to Lord knows where. Never to the mouth. It's pointing to like the hip, the arm, above the head, and you want to make sure the balloon is more concise. Don't be afraid to break up a sentence and put another sentence as its own balloon. And then also the tail should always strive to point towards the speaking area of the figure. I can't stress enough how important that is too. So it's all these different things that are the language of comics and that provide a more immersible, seamless experience for the reader. Spicer said, what if I said please? And he goes, no worries, I totally get it. An editing show would be awesome. Yeah, one of these days maybe. Yeah, I can see it being something of value. Lion Mill says, by the way, I sent my logo. Sorry it took so long. My computer is 90 years old. Chrisick says, funny, Pete, I was wondering if you would consider editing comics. At what point is it best to have a comic edited? I would honestly say at the start. Get an editor on board when you're starting. So this way that they can actually, you get the script and everything and then show it to the editor that you're working with. And then they can help you out, develop and maintain consistency with the script, and then have them chime in again when the art starts coming in. A lot of people have an editor that they only really work with when everything's done. And even at Alterna, there's been people I've worked with where they go, hey, could you give it a good editing eye here? It's all done. And I'm like, well, how much do you want me to say? Because am I proofreading? Am I watching out for character consistency among the dialogue? Or if something in the story, if it doesn't work at all, plot-wise, character-wise, do you want me to bring that up? because that might mean that you have to rewrite that whole book. So it's not as simple as going in there afterwards and saying, okay, edit it now. It's all done. That's kind of like closing the barn door after all the horses have escaped. You're like, okay, well, not much we can do now. Just have to close it down and say, all right, there's a typo on page 15. That's not true editing at that point. So I would really recommend, if you get an editor, if you hire an editor, have them work with you at every possible level, aspect of that comic. Yeah, Metatron. Yeah, no Zeppelin balloons ready to pop. Exactly. Let's see here. Okay, so I am going to take a look here to see about that Lion Mill logo. Actually, before I do that, Lion Mill, did you want me to show that on screen and I'll close the show out that way, or do you want me to just privately give you a critique on the logo? Let me know, and then I'll do that. Let's see here. I'm looking at it right now. Okay. Yeah, so I got the logo up. Lion Mill, let me know. Do you want it private? You want it public? Okay. All right, we'll do a public critique. Let's see here. I'll bring that up. Okay. All right, so it's Cascadia. There you go. Okay, Cascadia. Okay. So here is the comic. This is the only one. I saw you sent a couple of different ones. I'll show this one. The other one is it's basically the same thing, except the coloring scheme has changed. All right. Now this to me, Okay. I would say that I feel like it's a little too busy. It's a little too busy. I feel like it's a little too difficult to read. And then I also I see it's hand drawn, correct? So the coloring is making it a little bit difficult because you have these very extreme serifs on here. And I get that you're probably going for that sort of a look. It looks like a good logo if it was like a novel, like a prose book, and it would be bigger across. But in the realm of a comic logo, I think you could do something a little bit bolder with it. It's hand drawn. There you go. Okay. He wants me to not be nice. The thing is you don't have to be cruel when you give a critique. I don't have to be like, it's garbage. But I do think it's a little busy. I think there could be something better here. I think there could be something better that's more impactful, a bit easier to read. I'm going to get rid of the comic book radio logo at the top, so that's not competing with it. So I can obviously read what it says, but at the same time, it is that there's something about it, because when you, let me see here. Something else you have to take into consideration that a lot of people don't is when it is like this. When it's this size as a thumbnail. So you have to be able to say that this is what your book would look like from a distance if it's on a shelf. And this is also what the book would look like when it's listed on a website. Even if it's slightly bigger than that, it's still a little bit more difficult to read. The eye almost ends up looking like a T. So the way that has the crossbar eye on both. It's not necessarily like it's a bad job, but at the same time, I think you could do something better. I think you could do something that's a little bit clearer. And then the subtitle then at the bottom, you would also need to move that art down, put that subtitle either underneath, or find a way, make it bolder on the bottom, even put it within a box or something else, and have it more distinct. So hopefully that helps. But that's the logo there. I'll show the other logo too, I guess. I'll show this one. Because you've got... the color scheme is kind of fighting as well. The color scheme on that is fighting the cover. Good grief. They don't make it easy here, do they? Where is... there it is. Okay. All right. And Adam is okay. Adam, it looks like he sent me a DM. So at least he's fine, which is good. Because I always get worried about people when I don't hear from them. And I think the worst. So I'm glad that he's fine. He was just busy. He had to do a double shift at work. So the color scheme's a bit better. It's a bit easier to see your logo. It still has the same problems where it's still a little too busy. This reminds me a lot of that, it was a Clive Barker book. Is it Arabat? Is that Abarat? Yeah, Abarat. That's what I'm thinking of. It reminds me a lot of the, if you go look up Abarat, it reminds me a lot of that design. I really think that there's a stronger logo design that you could do for this comic. So at that point, I would then ask you, Lion Mill, I would say, what, if you can summarize it, and you should be able to, the central theme and feel that the reader is supposed to get. Is this an adventure book? Is this a horror book? Is this an action book? What kind of book is it? What age are you aiming it at? What genre is it? And then also, what would be the overall tone? So that is then where I would take, okay, do this, do that, try that out instead. So come up with that. And if you want to answer here, you can answer here. If you want to answer privately, you could do that too. But that's where I would ask the next question about what exactly is Cascadia and what kind of feel the logo would have would be based on those answers. Lion Mill says, excellent points. Get it bolder, easier to read at a distance. All of that helps. Thank you. There you go. And that's just solid for every single logo, to be honest. That's not just for this logo. That's for all logos. Jenko says, this stream is gold. Thanks a lot, Pete. No problem at all. Ronan says, this looks like it would be sweet across the top of a poster. Yeah. So there's it's always tough when the logo, you're viewing it on its own, because you can view this on its own and go, oh, that's not bad. But again, what is it representative of? Because yeah, it reminds me of I think you're thinking of 1001 Arabian Nights. That's the vibe I get. I get kind of like, it's got an adventure fantasy, Middle Eastern, Arabic kind of thing. You know, I get a little bit of that from it. And meanwhile, the book is sci-fi, Neolithic adventure, all ages, mature lessons. Adults will enjoy it. Teens could read it, thinking Final Fantasy. So it's coming across with a different feel, because I had the exact same feeling with Killer Kovacs, with the 1001 Arabian Nights, it's got like an Aladdin vibe to it. I'm thinking more, you need something that's a bit, that's absolutely bolder, and that it is absolutely conveying the theme of sci-fi and adventure. So with that, usually you're looking at something that doesn't involve serifs. You're usually looking at something that's a bit sleeker. And even though you've got a Neolithic kind of thing going on with it, you can incorporate the Neolithic aspect in the coloring and even create a sleeker sci-fi logo. Imagine like a Star Trek or a Star Wars, but with like a rock like carving and texture into it. Not exactly like what I did here with King Cryptid, but in King Cryptid, maybe it's easier to see on this one, I've got kind of like little etchings into the bottom of the logo. You know, but if you want to bring in some of that without getting too busy with it, you could have it look more like it's carved out of like almost like a metal, like a metallic rock before it's been refined, smelted, etc. All of that. And bring that into the logo. And then it would bring across the feel. Because the logo should always bring across the feeling of the book. So once you isolate what the feeling is of the book, the product, etc., the logo should be representative of that. So keep that in mind. There you go. But yeah, that's it. So thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. It was an hour and a half of running through, hopefully trying to offer advice that helps you avoid some of the most common graphic design mistakes within comics. We touched upon layout, logos, and lettering. That's like the holy trinity of comic book graphic design. So hopefully this has helped. And again, if I had to distill it all when it comes to getting your comic printed right, talk to your printer. First and foremost, talk to your printer. Make sure you're getting everything you need to get from them. Paper samples, understanding what the total ink coverage would be on a specific paper once you've chosen it. Even ask for color profile information. That's going to tell you what your dot gain is going to be set at, how much that total ink coverage will be, various other things where it's going to print a certain way, because if the color profile is off, your page is going to print either too saturated or not saturated enough, and it's going to come out looking wonky and weird. And then you can calibrate your system appropriately to match theirs. If I had to distill logo, you want to keep it simple. You want to keep it as simple and distilled as you possibly can. You want to express the feeling of that book. Your logo is representative of that book, of that product, of that story, that character. If the logo is about the character, like King Cryptid, it's the name of the character, but it's also the name of the book. It needs to be representative of that character. It needs to have a feeling that's similar to the feeling of that character as well as that series. If your logo is representative more of a title that has to do with the plot or something abstract, it needs to, again, still be representative of the feeling you're trying to elicit from that reader. The lettering, consistency. You want to stay as consistent as you possibly can. It might not be the perfect font. It might not be the perfect balloon, but you want to stay consistent. So hopefully you guys got something out of this. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. I'm going to get back to packing up orders because stuff's got to get out. About 100 tomorrow. Not about, actually over. Tomorrow I'm going to be hitting the 100 package mark. I hit about 78 today. Books got here Monday. So tomorrow the 100th plus package is going out. Thank you guys for being patient with it. And then one last final thing. I want to remind you guys there's only 12 days left to back Alterna's winter apparel campaign. And that is only on alternacomics.com. So you can go to alternacomics.com/winter. Let me put that here. If it's not pinned to the top of the chat, it might still be there. Alternacomics.com/winter will take you right there for winter apparel and merch. This ends November 27th. We've got premium blankets, hoodies. We got a new beanie, a navy blue beanie with a white logo as opposed to the red. A 15-ounce mug, Live Free and Indie. We're in New Hampshire, where Live Free or Die is the state motto. Live Free and Indie is appropriate, because I'd rather not die. That'll be good. Not yet, anyway. And then we got blankets, hoodies, good stuff. We got, for all 6, we got Blood Realm, Horus H. Hoover, King Cryptid, Red Koi, Unit 44, and Wolf and Batsy. We got a great hoodie, and we got blankets for you guys. The blankets are huge. They're fleece, 60 inches by 80 inches. Big, big blankets. These things are like tapestries. And then the hoodies come in sizes from small to 5XL. These have art all over the front and the back. Front and back across the board on all 6. Hoodies are $50, blankets are $50, the mugs and the beanies are $15. So again, 12 days left to get this, and that's about it. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. And other than that, everybody have a wonderful evening. I will be back tomorrow, hopefully with Mark Polton. We had to reschedule last time. But Mark Polton should be here at 9 o'clock Eastern. I'll see you guys then. And until then, until tomorrow, you know what I'm going to say. Have a great night. And an even better tomorrow. See you guys then. Everybody, take it easy.